I'm running the Boston Marathon in April 2026, and it's been a bit of a wild and strange journey to get here. So I thought I'd make a video to explain some of the things that happened and how I ended up being able to run the 2026 Boston Marathon. Now, a little bit about me. I'm a psychologist, and I usually do videos about topics like depression, anxiety, and psychological skills and tools that people can use to better manage those types of psychological conditions. But I also enjoy running. And the story behind me getting into running is a bit of a funny one. And it's rooted in a little bit of psychology as well. It was 2018, and I was at the wedding of a friend of mine, and they had a video montage that they usually do in weddings. And one of the pictures in the video montage was my friend finishing a marathon. And I remember thinking to myself, seeing that picture, wow, that's crazy that he ran a marathon. I could never do that. And it was in that moment that I caught myself saying those words, I could never do that. And I said to myself, well, why could I never do that? Like, what would stop me from being able to do that? And so I couldn't think of anything why I couldn't do it. So I decided that night I was going to run the May 2019 Vancouver Marathon. Now, I'd never run before. I never ran in high school. I never ran for fun. I never ran in university. I wasn't a runner. I never considered myself a runner. I never did any running. And so, we're not talking about couch to 5K. We essentially went from couch to marathon in the span of about 8 months. And I ended up running the Vancouver Marathon in May of 2019, and you might imagine it kind of went about as well as it could have gone. It was extremely challenging. It was extremely tough. I learned a lot about how difficult marathons are, and I ended up running a 4:17, which I was very happy about because it was my first time running a marathon. I wasn't even sure I'd be able to run a marathon. So to be able to do that, I felt pretty happy about. Now, the funny thing was that as I was training for the Vancouver Marathon, my wife jokingly said to me one morning, well, why don't you just put your name in for the lottery for the New York City Marathon? There's no way you'll get in. The odds are so slim, but just do it for fun. And so I did it for fun, and sure enough, I ended up getting into the New York City Marathon, even though the odds of getting in through the lottery was something like 6 or 7% that year. And so there I was, having finished the Vancouver City Marathon in, May of 2019, and I had the New York City Marathon set up for me for November of 2019. And so I went into that marathon with the goal of I wanted to just try and break the 4-hour barrier, try to get something in the 3-hour range. And so I ran that marathon and I ended up with a 4:03. So not exactly the time I wanted, but it was a really cool experience. It's kind of like a bucket list marathon. And so I ran that marathon and I thought, all right, I'm done. Wouldn't it be kind of neat if my marathoning journey ended crossing the finish line of the New York City Marathon in Central Park? Kind of a cool way to go out. But uh, just because I didn't want to run any more marathons, I didn't want to stop running. I still enjoyed it. I'd actually grown to enjoy it. It became part of what I did. It became part of my routine. It became what I did every morning. I'd get up and go for a run. And I didn't want to stop that. So I just continued running. And one of my runs in December of 2019, I titled it on Strava the 5,082 kilometer dream. And the idea of 5,082 kilometers, it's the distance from my house to the starting line of the Boston Marathon. And I don't really remember why I thought about doing that. I wasn't even close to running a Boston Marathon qualifying time, but it was just put out there as kind of like this dream. Wouldn't it be amazing if I ever were able to do that? So I just continued running, and then, as you might recall, some things happened in the spring of 2020, and the world kind of shut down. And it was during the pandemic that I continued to run, and that running really became a sense of sanity for me. Like with all the craziness going on in the world, it was something that could just ground me for the day. And there was something eerie about running on the streets during the spring of 2020 when there were no cars on the road and everything was so quiet. There's something kind of eerily beautiful about that as well, and an opportunity to really reflect on everything that was going on while I went for my runs. And so I just continued to plug away running with no real sense of purpose for doing it. And then in the fall of 2021, I thought to myself, um, I've heard really good things about the Chicago Marathon. And now the thing is, I never run a flat marathon before. And that was one thing that really appealed to me about Chicago because the Vancouver Marathon is very hilly. The New York City Marathon has all those bridges. So to be able to run a flat marathon, there was something really super appealing about that. And I always heard good things about the Chicago Marathon. And so I put my name in for the lottery for the Chicago Marathon. And then in December of uh, 2019, I found out that I actually got in. So I now won two world major lotteries for getting in to the marathons. And so super excited, super lucky, super fortunate. Again, that sense of serendipity that sort of weaved its way through my marathoning story. And so now I had the Chicago Marathon set for October of 2022. And so I trained for that. And the training was kind of up and down. During that time, I suffered a stress fracture in my foot and then had to recover from that. But I recovered in time to run Chicago in October 2022. And the day was absolutely perfect. It was a sunny day, but it was so crisp and cold, which was perfect, the absolute perfect weather for running the marathon. And as I ran the marathon, um, things just went so well for me. And I just felt so strong. And even at times when I felt like things were going to fall apart or the wheels were going to fall off, it was around, I remember kilometer 29. I remember saying to myself, you're never going to be in this moment ever again. Just give it everything you've got. And I was able to pull off a whole bunch of quick kilometers after that. And I ended up running a 3:16 marathon in Chicago, which was about a 4-minute Boston qualifying time. And so I was elated. I never thought I would ever be able to run a Boston qualifying time. It was about over a 45-minute, almost a 45-minute PR. And I was just giddy about the idea of being able to apply for Boston. And so I was planning, I was going to apply for Boston, but in the spring of 2023, I decided, hey, I'm going to run the Vancouver Marathon again, just as a way of, I ran it a few years earlier, but now I knew something a little bit more about that marathon, and I wanted to just run it better and run a better race. And I ended up running a 3:17 in Vancouver in May of 2023. And I was happy with that time. Vancouver's a tough course. There's lots of hills. It's very technical. And so it was a tough course, and I was really happy with that time. But still my Chicago time was going to be the time that I used for my Boston application. And so I applied for Boston in September of 2023. And unfortunately, it wasn't fast enough. It wasn't below the cutoff time that year. And so at that point, I knew that I could do it. I knew I could qualify for Boston. I'd run two Boston qualifying marathons. And so I thought to myself, all right, let's try and find a marathon that's going to be really fast that you'll be able to do and get a time that gets you into Boston. And in Washington State, just south of where I am, there's a marathon called the Tunnel Marathon. And the unique feature of this marathon is that it's a gradual 2% downhill grade for pretty much the entire marathon. So it's a very fast course, and a lot of people use it to get Boston qualifying times. And so I decided, okay, I'll sign up for that marathon. I'll run that marathon. And so I ran the Tunnel Marathon in September of 2024. And unfortunately, I was coming off a cold like the week before the marathon, and the day of the marathon was really, really hot. And so I ended up running the marathon, but I ran a 3:17, which I knew probably wasn't going to be fast enough to get me into Boston. So it was a bit of a letdown, still another Boston qualifying time, but a bit of a letdown. I applied for Boston anyway, just because I ran the time, I might as well apply. And then I found out later that month that unfortunately I didn't get in again. And so dealing with some disappointment, I wasn't surprised that I didn't get in the second time, but still disappointing that now at this point I had run, 3 Boston qualifying times and still wasn't enough to get into Boston. And so I set my mind again. I was going to rerun that tunnel marathon and hopefully get better weather and not be coming off a cold running the marathon the next time. And so I reran the tunnel marathon in June of 2024, or sorry, June of 2025. And uh, unfortunately, it was another really hot day. It was around sort of mid 20s Celsius, which is really hot and really uncomfortable for running a marathon. But my training had been good and I felt strong and I ran a smart race and I ended up running a 3:13 marathon, which put me just under 7 minutes below the cutoff time for the qualifying time for Boston. And so I was confident that that would be enough in terms of a buffer to get me into Boston. But then you go on all of these websites that predict what the Boston cutoff time going to be, and you see the ranges. And, it's going to be 5:30. Oh, it's going to be 6:30, and then there's the margins of error. And so I never was fully comfortable, um, even though I was confident, but never fully comfortable. So I applied to the Boston Marathon in September of 2025, and just last week I got the email confirming that I did indeed uh, qualify and get into the 2026 Boston Marathon. And so, um, it's been kind of a journey, right? From that night in 2018 when I told myself I could never do that to now here I am, not just having run 1 marathon, but now having run 6 marathons, 4 of which are Boston qualifying times. And now my next marathon, my 7th marathon, is going to be the 130th running of the Boston Marathon, which is a a bit mind-blowing. It's still a little surreal for me. But along the way, throughout this whole process, one of the things that as a psychologist I've been able to do is use a lot of the psychological tools and skills that I use with my clients to help me get through some of the setbacks and the disappointments and the challenges and keeping myself motivated. It takes a lot, and I've used a whole bunch of psychological tools. I'm not going to be able to remember them all right now, but I'll put them up on the screen when I think about all of the things that I've done and I've used along the way. Um, but ultimately, one of the things that's been most rewarding about this is just how hard it's been. It's important to do. I think it's important to do hard things in life because it's when you do those difficult things, when you test yourself, when you push yourself, when you fail repeatedly to accomplish something, what it does is it teaches you resilience. It teaches you the ability to bounce back, and it teaches you what you're actually capable of. I didn't have to listen to that voice in my head that said, "You could never do that." If I had, I would have missed out on so much. So I know that not everybody is really into marathons and no, not everybody wants to run. So I'm not suggesting that everybody should run a marathon or challenge themselves to run a marathon. But it may not be a marathon for you. It may be something else. It may be a school program that you think you'd never get into. It could be a relationship you never think you'd ever be able to have. I don't know what it is, but lots of people have goals. Lots of people have things that they want in their life that they would like to accomplish, but they tell themselves, I could never do that. And what I found through this process of running and process of getting into Boston is that the biggest limitations we have are the limitations that we set for ourselves and the things that we tell ourselves we're not capable of doing. And so I hope you'll keep that in mind and not and catch yourself when your thoughts are limiting what you think you're able to do. So, if you're still watching at this point, thank you. I know I've rambled a bit here, but I just want to give you that sense of encouragement and that sense of hope, and maybe it will be helpful for you. So, if you're interested in hearing more about my journey or my training to Boston in April of 2026, let me know in the comments below. I don't know if anybody is really interested in me doing this. If you are, it'd be great to know, and I'll try and keep you updated as we go along. If nobody's interested, then, I can just stop and stick to psychology. That's fine as well. So that's all for today's video. As always, thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video, and I'll see you in the next one.